Welcome. Today, Lauren and Christine and I are going to be talking about sun transits 13 and 49. So during the discussion, we're going to be exploring around, seeing what we can learn, and then sort of seeing what we can play with over the next two periods of 5.5 days, these sun transits. Right. So, Christine, maybe you could fill us in on these gates so that we could get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lois. Yeah, so we are stepping into gate 13 in the human design mandala. And what's interesting about this gate to me, this is in human design language, we call this gate the listener. And in the I Ching, it's called the fellowship of man. And the hexagram itself has a trigram of heaven over fire. And so the fire is the base trigram. And what's interesting about that in this gate 13 in particular is that gate 13 in human design is what we call a master gate. And so it is the first gate in this eighth of the mandala that is all about fire on the bottom trigram, right? So this whole, I don't know, five and the next 40-ish days has everything to do with this energy of fire, about light and heat and warmth, and also about awareness and understanding. And so it runs the gamut of like light to enlightenment. And this is this energy we're stepping into in this next eighth of the wheel. And so I think it's particularly interesting because gate 13 in the human design body graph lives in our G center, in our identity center, in the middle of our body. And it is our kind of like, I think of it as our soul, like the seat of our soul, but it is our higher knowing and who we are in the world, where we're going. And so we're stepping into this kind of directional energy about what we're doing, where we're going, and can we do it with our higher self knowing? And so that I think is interesting. The other piece of that is interesting to me is this section of the mandala, these eight gates are, other than this gate 13 and one other gate, six of the eight gates all live in our emotional solar plexus. So this is really going to be a stretch of emotional energy. They all share this bottom trigram of fire. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see over the next, all the way through the spring equinox, actually, how we are feeling emotionally and how we are managing our emotions, versus our higher self knowing and all of that. So I think it's a really beautiful time. And I also just want to bring up real quickly, like, also, we continue this theme of beginnings and endings, right? Like, as we are beginning this gate, we're going into this Pisces energy, which is the ending of the zodiacal energy, starting up again, in the spring equinox. So I just think it's interesting for folks to think about this first quarter every year having so many overlapping beginnings and endings and how that shows up for us energetically.
Wow. Wow, Christine, there's so many threads I want to follow
I know,
in
I'm
that.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me follow the beginnings and endings because I think for folks to tap into that, that can be in relationships. And I think a lot of folks are feeling into that now, relationships coming to an end, that they've done their service. Um, New relationships. I know myself, I feel like I'm being connected with more and more folks that are also doing the work out there, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. And it can be in, I don't want to do this job anymore. I want to do something different. It could be endings of ways we found safety. We're certainly seeing a lot of crumblings of systems. So I think on that higher level, that's something of great interest to me.
It's interesting when you're talking about that because you also mentioned higher self, Christine. And in
Mhm.
this knowing when we're in connection with our higher self, when all of these shifts and changes are happening. And so, like, am I actually in connection with higher self, or am I letting my ego get triggered and take over? Right. And the ego, we're not trying to get rid of the ego here, but we kind of need it in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. So Like, how are the time? What, I guess, how do I know when I'm in connection with my higher self?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paying attention when you feel it is like, so what does that feel like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it, obviously it probably feels different for everyone, but I think there's an embodied calm and trust, right? Like when we're feeling frenetic in any way, even at the mildest level, that's a pretty good sign to us.
Yeah.
We're not in connection with that higher self, right?
It makes me
And this,
think of polyvagal theory here, right? Because you
yeah,
were just saying that calm, right? Sitting
yeah.
back, and I interrupted you, Christine. So,
No, no, no. That's absolutely, keep going. I love the polyvagal angle.
well, when I think of this higher self, and then when we drop down into the lower vibration, I also come back to what is the theme we've talked about before: reacting and responding. Right. So if we're reacting, we know we're coming from that lower vibration, and we're coming in from a place of fear.
Yep.
And again, this is the polyvagal theory. And when I taught this to practitioners, I would talk about, you're in connection with yourself, and that being your higher self, depending on how you're sitting in the chair. It's that simple. Like, are you on the edge of your seat? Are you leaning forward? Are you trying to fix that person across from you?
Yep.
Or are you back and truly in the spirit of this gate listening?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, and the shadow through the gene keys, the shadow of this gate is reaction,
Yeah.
right? And so it's 100%, obviously you brought that word up. It's exactly right. Like, when we're in reaction, that is in a hyper fast state, right? You're just immediately, whatever's coming at you, you're not, it's not a response, right? A response engenders a pause, right? A reaction isn't, there's no pause. It's just you're full on usually in opposition to whatever's coming at you, right? So yeah, that's right there in the gene key as well. And just recognizing, like, again, this is this first gate in this series of gates, like, and that's why I think it's so interesting that, I mean, essentially the way the mandala is laid out, every first gate of every section comes out of the G center, right? Which I think is a really beautiful thing in just in and of itself, right? Like every series of 8 starts with this place of like higher knowing. Okay, like here I am, let's ground in this because we have this series of energy that's coming at me, right? How do I feel this thing? And again, like this is what we're trying to show here in these discussions is that this is the background frequency, right? Gate 13, this listening to ourselves in order to be able to listen to others is the supportive energy being offered to us this coming 5.5 days, right? And so really trying to take that in and embody like what that feels like, because I can guarantee over the next 40 days, all of this stuff from the emotional solar plexus is going to be a little bit much. you know?
And two, like, is that the listening to ourselves and being able to bring ourselves back. But this also moves into the I Ching hexagram and that ability, this sort of community of man, that we're all in this
Yep.
together. And if we are more capable of being, in alignment with ourselves, then we're going to be more alignment with other people. We're going
Yep.
to be able to touch into what's going on and then respond rather than react to what's happening.
Yep.
Yeah. When I was thinking about this in regards to GMOs, and especially in these with this emotional charge, the GMOs reflected quite clearly, at least for me. And I think to listen takes courage, right? But we can't be in a place of fear. If we're in a place of fear, we cannot listen. It doesn't matter. And so there's an extract, black poplar, that when taken in microdose addresses that really gut level fear that informs all we do. And just to give you all a visual that may not be familiar with the tree, the leaves quake It has a cousin here in the US, which is quaking aspen. But in that fear, it's literally quaking in fear. And I think a lot of us are walking around with that, at least tapped into that collectively, because it exists. There's a lot of structures in place that are trying to promote that fear in folks and to put them in that quaking state. So I think that might be a interesting extract to work with during these 5.5 days.
Yeah, I love that. I can
Yeah, and
attest. I love black poplar.
I've taken it too. It does have that effect. But there's like in the use of the gemo, but also in the moment, just thinking about like how, and a lot of people have a sensation of their connection with their higher self at the sort of the above the heart and sort of between the heart and the throat. And it's when we're feeling off center is to put our hands just sort of on our chest and just, take that moment to bring yourself back to you. And just, it just gives that little bit of peace, that little pause that you mentioned, Christine. Just make the shift.
I just had this beautiful picture, Lois, of that catching on and people just doing that, right? Just like if you sneeze, you cover your mouth, but when something comes at you, you just regulate. I mean, wouldn't that be beautiful if we could start teaching children that early on?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. And it's again like those simple somatic, that's a somatic practice, right? It's a very simple somatic practice. It's both calming and protective, right? And just bringing your attention again to this spot about you, right? And in the spirit of this gate, listening to ourselves, right? This is the last person we're taught to listen to in this culture, right?
Mhm.
And so it's a real practice to remind ourselves to listen to ourselves first. And in part, like in this, as this energy is moving through, you know, the energy that's coming at us next is this gate 49, which is revolution, right? Like it is a big energy. It's here to be like, things have got to change, right? But we can't know what to change if we're not listening to ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So I see this progression, like we are in this gate 19 right now, being sensitive. What is it that we're finding making us sensitive in the world? And sensitivity is not a bad thing, it's a great thing. Like, what is it that we're paying attention to? The 13 is saying, okay, listen to that, right? Literally pay attention. What is it telling you? What are you hearing? And then the 49 is like, great, now go act on it, right?
What are you going to do about it?
Right.
Yeah. But if we have action without listening, then we really do have a mess, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have dysregulation, right? We have
Yeah.
what we have in the world, right? We skip the listening part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, talk to us more about this gate 49.
Yeah, so it's the gate of principles in human design, and it's the hexagram of revolution, right? And it's still that fiery base trigram. It's still fire. It's lake over fire. It's joy over fire, right? And so revolution is done not to be violent and disruptive. Revolution is done to create more joy, right? To make things better. Right. And so we have, I think, a kind of a negative view of revolution as a word. It's like, oh, it's, violent and unnecessary and all of those things, but it's completely necessary, right? And we see it all the time in our lives, right? We wake up one day and we're just like, I'm done with this. I'm cleaning this piece of the house out and it's over, right? We do it all the time because we need that new energy, right? But it has to be, again, from this place of higher knowing, right? And in the body graph in human design, it lives in the solar plexus. So this is a very emotional gate, right? It can just show up out of nowhere, and it can be not rational. You're like, I'm just feeling this thing and I don't know why, but I'm feeling it. I'm going to pay attention to it, right? And I have some fuel behind it to do something about it. So there will be a lot of, I think, emotional just emotional energy in the air in the next month. And again, that aligns anybody that knows, anything about the zodiac, about astrology. We're coming into a Pisces season, right? Pisces is very much known for its emotion and its watery, flowy energy. And so they all line up in that way too.
Mm, mm. I'm thinking already of the Jimmo because it's coming up so clear. So there's an extract for the nervous system that helps us um, engage with our tools in a more useful way, and during periods of time that require constant regulation. And I think this whole stretch that we're talking about, and you're, where it's very emotionally charged, but particularly this, that we stay in regulation in a what I would call an organized sympathetic state. So we're getting things done, but we're mindful about it. So there's action and mindfulness, and this is gray alder. And what's really interesting about this is I'm thinking about with gray alder grows in thickets in community, and it loves to be surrounded with its brothers and sisters, right? And I think about that in revolution, like gray alder can take over an area in no time at all. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, I love that.
So it might be an extract to think about.
One thing that came up when I was sort of looking through the material for today was, and it applies to both gates in a way, is having a sense of what our values are in terms of that being able to come back to ourselves, because there's lots of times where we think we know what our values are.
Oh, yeah.
And don't necessarily recognize that they shift as we change and grow, and also actually being able to prioritize them. So that when it comes to making a decision, we go, well, actually, I know that this is the most important thing for me, be it your work, be it your family, whatever it is that really stands out as the most important thing to you. And so it makes that much easier to go, oh yeah, no, I know what matters here. So that connection again with that higher knowing.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Like this is this revolution of print. This is the gate of principles, right? But again, we often think we know what we value, but when we really start listening to ourselves, we recognize we're not living by our own values. We're very often living through somebody else's, received ideas of what's of value, right? And so I think that this is really important that we really do some sort of exercises around like what is it that I value, like trying to get rid of all of the stories that I've received, all of the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing or should be, like is that really what I value? It's really hard. It's a hard exercise.
It is. And actually there are all kinds of lists online.
Yeah.
As you can go and then get those lists and then just go through a process of elimination of what really resonates and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, this really aligns with the greater astrology, and Pluto's work in Aquarius is getting rid of all the things we don't need, right? Unearthing it and bringing it up so we can take it and look at it, and that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about reassessing so that we can live in alignment, because so many of us have accepted a life that is less than our values. And whether that's a job that we feel like, oh, we have to have because we have to earn this amount of money, or we have to live in that big house or whatever. But then suddenly we wake up and we realize that that's not really in alignment with ourselves anymore.
You just made me think of like coming out of these last two transits here where codependency was an aspect of it. And thinking about how many people have tried to pull me into a codependent situation.
Wow.
And that this like sort of following through on what we've been talking about, being able to go, well, actually, this is where I am.
Yeah.
Right. and not getting drawn into that because it's so easy to just get sort of sucked in.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I'm curious, like, well, I mean, it dovetails in knowing what we value too, right? Like, what do we value? How do we use our energy, right? Like, that is exactly what our values will teach us, right? Like, oh, this is something I do not want to spend my energy on, right? So, good for you that you figured that out. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I want to take a minute and just share with everyone this tool that actually Christine shared with me several years ago, Christine, because
Yeah, it's been
I
a
see it's
while.
like from 2020 probably. And this is Animal Totems and the I Ching. And who's the author of the book, Christine?
Her name's Brynja Magnuson, I think.
Okay.
Magnuson, I think. I will put a link in our show notes because we can do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what she offers are these beautiful cards for each ha um, I Ching hexagram and with an animal totem. So, as I'm listening to us, I realize that a lot of what we're talking about here isn't tangible for folks, right? And I think there's a few things for those of us that are very visual, having something to put our eyes on and go, oh, that sums that energy up. And so I think animal totems are beautiful in doing that. I like looking at the hexagrams, but that may or may not speak to you. Maybe you are more of an auditory learner and you can gather that information just by listening to us ramble. And good for you if you can. But for instance, gate 13 is the lynx, and the lynx is the secret keeper, and the higher level energy that the lynx brings is solitude and history and listening. And I love that remembering piece, right? Remembering the history and bringing that forward, because we're in a time that that is coming back into value. Um, the bat is the animal totem for hexagram 49 for revolution, and the bat is rebirth. I mean, what a powerful image for that gate. So for those of you that might be looking for another tool, I think this is a great offering.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it's a great example of somebody who, and this has happened throughout history, right? Like the I Ching has been written by many people and rewritten by many people, and people have done their own personal I Chings in various ways. I just saw a woman the other day who did her personal I Ching in necklaces made of stone. She's got all 64 of them, and they're all
Wow.
meaningful to her, and they map to each one of the hexagrams, right? And so Brynja has done that here, right? She has a personal connection with nature and animals, and she's worked through in her own system which ones map to which hexagram, right? And so I think that that's part of what we're talking about here. It's like this calendar that we have is a way to for each of us to just see what these energies mean for us personally, and if they bring up these kinds of like symbols of our from our own, lived experience. And so I think it's a really beautiful example of that too.
It's interesting how there's a commonality that comes together in these different ways where it shows that it's just revealing what is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just uncovering, pulling the veils away from things rather than just making it up.
Yeah.
And that brings us closer and closer to alignment as humanity, and well, not just humanity, you include animals and the environment, but this unveiling really appeals to me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, it's just the whole Gaia principle, right? Like we're just, again, we're such conditioned mental beings, right? Once we got this prefrontal cortex, we were hellbound to use it to its max, right? And now we're like, wait a minute, maybe this prefrontal cortex hasn't actually it hasn't actually brought us any more connection. Right? And so like recognizing that, yeah, it's good for some tasks, but still a whole bunch of our brain that has all kinds of other knowledge that we've, kind of put on the back burner for a long time. And this unveiling, this recognizing these patterns, right? Just re-embodying what it means to be part of a bigger organism, which is what I think we are, I think is really profound.
Yeah. I want to give another plug for your calendar, Christine,
Oh,
because
thanks.
I love it so very much, and I want to remind folks that you can head over to Christine's website. It's on the store for a lovely, accessible price of $11, and you can download it, do something fancy like I did with a nice spiral binding, or put it, Lois, you put yours in a 3-ring binder. And I think just put all the other bits out of your mind. Don't get distracted by them. Just start taking notes.
Yeah.
And because that's exactly what I did in the beginning. And it's interesting, and not right. It's not surprising. This begins to teach itself to you.
Yeah.
And I'm a very experiential learner, and I found just noting the connections and that I was experiencing and observing has been what's really taught me the most about these gates.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's also
that's how you have to come to all of it, right? Sorry, Lois. This is it. Like we can't, we can study all of everybody else's way of looking at things and all of that, but that's only going to go so far, right? At some point, you're going to have to, live your own experience, and this is just a tool for
Yeah.
noting that lived experience.
Exactly.
which sort of leads into actually where I was going in terms of the contemplative nature of this is like as you're paying attention, is the ability to contemplate what is your experience of life and really getting to know it better. Because I know in my work, I run across a lot of people where I go kind of going like, so whose life are you living anyway? And so how do we live our own lives?
Yeah. Oh, I
I
love
love
that. So I think it's only fair, though, to give this one disclaimer is once you start doing this, you're going to lose all track of real time, or not real time. What's the contrived time? And
You might need fingers on your devices to help.
yeah, I have actually gotten to the point where I put very important appointments in this calendar now, because one, it helps align it, but I've also found stuff that maybe I booked a month ago or a couple weeks ago. Once it's in there, they start aligning too. Like, well, of course I'd be meeting with that person during gate 19, or of course this would happen during this gate. So that's just another way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also an expansion of time too, right? Like, because I think that this, if this experiment plays out the way I think it will bring us back closer to recognizing that, again, this is a cyclical energy, right? Like we are spiraling through space on this energy all the time. We are going to revisit gate 13 next year at the end of January, right? In the beginning of February. How will it show up for us then? Will we see relationships? And I think we will, right? And again, like when you start seeing relationships years out, all of a sudden what's going on Tuesday just doesn't seem quite as, as important.
Right.
I love it. Have we done it all, ladies? Did we tell them everything?
Oh, everything, absolutely. If only we knew everything.
Yes, exactly.
It does feel like it's been very full conversation today, though. Right.
Yeah.
So I guess we will end it there and say thank you to each of you and thank you to whoever's listening and hope to see you again next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Lois. Thanks, Lauren.